Hi, welcome to Culture Determined. I'm your host, Aryeh Cohen-Wade, and my guest today is Katie Baker. Katie, could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Katie Baker. I'm a staff writer at The Ringer, and long time fan of the internet.
Well, thank you for coming on. And I've actually wanted to have you on for a while, and you wrote something that gave me the perfect excuse to do it, which is this very fun piece that ran at The Ringer a couple weeks ago, Nickelodeon's Generational Divide. And so The Ringer did like Nickelodeon Week like 2 weeks ago, and a lot of content. And was it pegged explicitly to that day of the Rugrats and Doug debut?
Yeah, so that was we're always looking for a good anniversary peg. And this one was the 30th anniversary of the launch of Nicktoons, which was Rugrats, Doug, and Ren and Stimpy in 1991. So
yeah, so someone
I remember.
Someone tweeted that, and I joked that name a more culturally important day for geriatric millennials. I'll wait, because it is kind of crazy that three shows that are iconic in each in their own way, and they all debuted on the same day, August 11th, 1991. So 30 years ago. And so you guys did a bunch of different stories. You interviewed people. You did like I guess it's a classic thing with The Ringer. You did like a March Madness style competition of who is the ultimate Nick character, and I think SpongeBob won that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Wasn't it like SpongeBob versus, like, I'm trying to remember, wasn't it like versus was it the Rugrats guy, or who was the final?
Was it Tommy? Tommy Pickles.
Or no. It was like, it spoke to, I remember it kind of spoke to the point of my piece, which was like, when we sat down to, first of all, come up with the list of entrants for the bracket, which everyone had a ton of people that were left out that they're very upset about, or a ton of entities. I think like the aggro crag was left off, and I was very upset. But
a character, yeah, it's like New York City is a character in Sex and the City, the aggro crag.
Yeah, exactly. But there's such a generational divide. Like, and to me, it's kind of pre-post SpongeBob, because that's my personal like cutoff point. Basically, when I was graduating high school and going to college, and I definitely remember like SpongeBob being on TVs in college, like, but it wasn't something that I was watching or have any real familiarity with. Whereas I can go down the line of all the 90s era shows, and so anyway, that part of what my piece was about was kind of that. How everyone has these really specific memories of Nickelodeon, and everyone thinks theirs is like the specific one. We know that ours is actually the one that matters as our geriatric millennials. But yeah, so I forget. Anyway, the bracket ended up being like a battle between, the new era and the old era.
So I just loaded it up. So the final four, did you start with 64?
Yeah, I think so, didn't we?
Incredibly, yeah. I think there were 64 originally. And the final four ended up being Doug, Tommy Pickles,
that's right, Doug,
SpongeBob, and Arnold from Hey Arnold.
Which I was annoyed, because I feel like Chucky should be above Tommy Pickles, but that's just me.
That's, character versus show. Obviously, these are all essentially, the main character of their show. I guess I see. It looks like Tommy from Rugrats made it to the Elite Eight, but was taken out by SpongeBob. The eventual champion was SpongeBob versus Tommy enough. Pickles. And so there may be people watching who have essentially no idea what we're talking about, because if they are, 5 years older or younger than you and I are, and we are at the same age and actually do each other a little bit of college, then this is perhaps all nonsense. And so this is like a micro-targeted episode, but that is, like you were saying, this is what your piece was about, that they're sort of like, I don't know, each generation has their own Nickelodeon or something, but maybe...
Like, I've never seen iCarly, but iCarly I think it's having a whole, reboot right now.
Yeah, they're bringing it back. Yeah, so there's all this stuff. And with SpongeBob, it's similar with me. I don't think I've ever actually seen an episode of SpongeBob, or maybe even seen it on a television. But it's certainly like, it's like the most memed thing, and people who are just a bit younger than us were into it. My brother was born in 1990, and so I feel like he would have been into it, but maybe even he was a bit just a couple years too old to be into SpongeBob, so SpongeBob debuted in 1999, and maybe he was just slightly too old for it and was more into like Power Rangers and and that kind of stuff
Yes.
at that age. So I missed it like both times. But our micro generation, the geriatric millennials or something, elder millennials, had this.
I saw someone call it. Was it you that retweeted? Someone called it elderly millennials.
That wasn't
recently.
me, but I like geriatric.
And I was like,
funny.
Me too. I used to really resent. When millennials first became a thing, like back in the Tumblr days of the late aughts, people have started to really talk about millennials a lot more. And I remember being resentful that I was a millennial because I felt like I identified more with like the Gen. I mean, there's been things obviously said since then, like the Jared Leto or the Jordan Catalano generation
or Oregon Trail generation. Yeah.
But I feel like we've settled upon a very apt, like, I like that it's this elder millennial, geriatric millennial, because it gets at how I feel about being a millennial while still, I mean, I am a millennial, so I need to just accept it.
Yes. And so we're among the older cohort of millennials. And yeah, I mean, the oldest millennials turning 40 this year. And there are millennials who are grandparents, I assume, if people have a kid at 18 or 19 and that happens again. So yeah, millennial people, the media has been obsessed with millennials for so long. Finally, they seem to be more interested in Gen Z these days than millennials. But before the show started, we were talking a little bit about other blogging hits people like Mickey Kaus. And one of the things that annoys me about him is he's always talking about millennials treating them like they're eternal, like 24-year-olds and whose parents are telling them to go out and get a job. But millennials have been in the workforce for
they're the parents
years
now.
And the people who they're just talk about both the child tax credit or this idea that JD Vance had about giving parents the votes of their minor children to empower parents more, because JD Vance is either actually believes or is pretending to believe that there's like a war of the childless against parents. But like, who has kids under 18 now? It's like, maybe it's some Gen Xers, but who is in prime like childbearing years? It's millennials and older Gen Zers, I guess. So
yeah, which I mean, like, it's interesting to me, like when we talk about Nickelodeon, like I always wonder how big of a force that is, like how big of a force the like nostalgia trade is, you know what I mean? Because as we all know, we love to talk, I think we get owned by Gen Z for talking about the 90s so much. But we're also now the people that are increasingly in charge of making decisions about what gets rebooted and what gets brought back. And with the launch of Paramount Plus, I feel like they're kind of doing a fair amount of Nickelodeon-based reboots with Avatar, The Last Airbender, and all, which is another show that I have no like relation to, but is obviously a huge cultural, force. So yeah, like I always wonder how much this tendency of ours to kind of remember our childhoods and want to share it with our now, I have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. So one of my proud parenting moments is that my 5-year-old loves the show Inspector Gadget, which I used to love. And so
that's really cute.
Yeah, there's actually a rebooted Inspector Gadget, which is kind of random, but it's good.
Is there still Penny and Dr. Claw? And,
and there's a character that I think is new. I mean, it's like Dr. Claw's nephew and he's kind of Penny's foil, and he's kind of a bro. It's actually kind of funny. So check out the new Inspector Gadget.
I mean, we could talk entirely about the nostalgia angle for a whole episode, and so much of like popular culture now is playing on nostalgia and recycling things from either our childhood or Gen X or baby boomer childhoods. I mean, the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe, almost all those characters were created in the 60s. Yeah, Ghostbusters is now being rebooted for a second time. The Transformers movies, the He-Man just had a rebooted cartoon. It's like, so nostalgia is huge, and then you have all this stuff with like the toxic fans who are angry that like the Ghostbusters are women now or whatever. Or even if you get like one little thing wrong, and then like the fans online are super angry. But anyway, maybe some of that will be happening with the Nickelodeon properties. But part of what I liked so much about your piece was mentioning these things that have not been rebooted and basically forgotten by the culture. And so there was, parts of it were this is like a personal experience reading this, and, mentioning, Pinwheel, David the Gnome, Roundhouse, Are You Afraid of the Dark, Linda Ellerby, like these, this was really, I was like cast back into my childhood. and yeah. So okay, how did you decide that within Nickelodeon week this was going to be the piece that you were going to write?
Well, it was funny because after we had that planning meeting, I think they were thinking about, because the piece was sort of like I don't want to say it was the keynote piece and make it sound like it was some special piece, but it was run on the first day of our whole week, and it was kind of a stage setter for what was to come, and to kind of contextualize the bracket a little bit. But when they approached me to assign me that one specifically, it was kind of funny because my editor, Mallory Rubin, who's I think right about my age, she might be a few years younger, but she was like, we thought you'd be a good person given your, unique insight. A lot of my coworkers are like 24 years old. So I had a good, bird's eye view of the sprawl of the network. And we were kind of joking. I was like, oh, wow, make me feel old. Why don't you? But yeah, no, it's something that we had, and even as a Ringer staff, we've talked about the SpongeBob divide before. And so, it just felt like a good way to just kind of set the table. And I was happy and lucky to talk to some of the folks that were around in those early there was kind of the early Nickelodeon days when it was like first technically founded. And then there was Nickelodeon as we know it was sort of the result of a rebrand. And so I talked to a lot of people that were there at that inflection point, which, as I write about, is like what, resulted in like the orange splat logo that we all know and love, and kind of the look of the network that kind of crazily enough, like still endures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so you interview some of the people who are behind the scenes who I never heard their names before, but also Mike O'Malley, who was sort of the public face of the network for a couple of years there in the early 90s. And you start off with the burying of the Nickelodeon time capsule, and which is, just the way the event itself is absurd thinking back on it, but the way you describe it is very funny. And the things that were, okay, well, why don't you talk a little bit about that? The things they put in it and the way they were talking about it, and the Kids World Council, which I guess, it's decided what items are put in and so forth.
Yeah. Like, it was April 1992. So it was like a little bit after the Doug, the 30th anniversary, but it was kind of that same era, which is like, to me, the really prime era that I just remember very specifically. So yeah, you can look it up on YouTube, this Nickelodeon 1992 time capsule, and the YouTube itself is as good of a time capsule as the eventual vault. You've got Joey Lawrence, he's wearing a vest and jeans with a big black belt. And, but yeah, they had, and what I love about this is the list of items is very Nickelodeon. You had a Game Boy, you had a VHS of Home Alone, you had a skateboard, but then you had a piece of the Berlin Wall, and, I think they had something about, I'm not sure what exactly they put in. I think they put in like newspapers with clippings about like the ongoing AIDS crisis and
something about the Gulf War.
Yeah, something about the Gulf War, which really speaks to Nickelodeon, because things I remember about Nickelodeon, like in addition to all the shows, I remember a lot of like climate change stuff. I feel like, I know in the 90s Earth Day, recycling environmentalism was pretty big, and there's a lot of that. And a lot of, Linda Ellerby, as we were talking about, like she interviewed Magic Johnson back at the time. And I think that was kind of that's like a big subject to be putting on there. And it just showed how they really respected kids and kind of didn't talk down to kids, kind of as a institutional mandate. But anyway, also had some GAC in there, which for those that weren't 10 years old or 9 years old in 1992, GAC was kind of like the slime putty craze of today. But like better. I feel like we've almost gone backward in putty technology in the intervening decades. Yeah,
I remember. Yes, I had multiple GACs. And then I think I had like it must have been like the second iteration of GAC where they decided to make it give it like there was Floam. Floam was something different, but there was once people were bored with the initial run of GAC, they decided to do like GAC that smelled like different food. or something, or at least different smells. And one of the smells was butter popcorn. And that's the one I got. I remember it smelled so bad that I think my mom made me throw it out because like as soon as you opened it, like it made the entire house. So like this, like butter popcorn is already an artificial smell. So it was like an artificial imitation of an
Like
artificial
every
smell.
Jelly Belly bean like combined.
Yeah. So I remember that being gross. And so, yeah, so they had a lot of it was like gross out stuff and so on and so forth. I mean, it is funny to think about like, so yeah, the Berlin Wall falls in 89. And people are saying adults are saying it's the end of history, and then but then the Gulf War happens, and that's one of the first like political events I remember. And I think I was in second grade, and my teacher, her like nephew was in the military and was deployed, and he sent back like an MRE with like peanut butter in it, and like the kids were passing it around and like tasting the peanut butter and stuff. So it all seemed very exciting. There were Desert Storm playing cards. I tweeted about this in the past.
Yeah.
So you could get a Dick Cheney Secretary of Defense playing card, Colin Powell, Norman Schwarzkopf. All the Allied countries had their flags and stickers. It was a strange time in various ways. But
my biggest memory of it is that one of the priests at my church was like in the reserves, and so he got called. And then this is such a dumb one, but I think just because I think about this a lot with my kids, like my oldest one is at the age now where when I was his age, I can remember things from being that age. Right. So I think about it all the time. Like, what's he going to remember? And I remember from Desert Storm that I guess it was just always on the news. And so I always must have just been hearing the word Baghdad. It didn't mean anything to me. And whenever I would try to if my dad was like sitting somewhere and I was trying to get his attention, and I'd be like, Dad, and he wouldn't hear me. I would go, Baghdad, and he would always look. And so I just would always call that was like my word for when my dad was listening to me. I'd be like, hey, Baghdad. And that always got him like, what? But I mean, so those are the kinds of things that like, then at the same time, Nickelodeon is, putting parts of the Berlin Wall in a time capsule and addressing these sorts of things and telling kids to rock the boat and all that. So it's a funny mix of, by the way, this time capsule was all taking place at, what to me was like the mecca of kids in the 90s, which was the Nickelodeon studios in Orlando, Florida. So there's that aspect to it too.
Yes. And, I'll tell you afterwards who this person is, but someone we both know, I mentioned that I was going to do this, and this person grew up in Florida and actually told me that he competed in Legends of the Hidden Temple, but was eliminated in the first round. It was an eternal shame. But yeah, the idea that so they had all these game shows. Double Dare was the most famous, and then Guts, which was sort of like what is that show? Not American,
like American Gladiators.
Yeah, American Gladiators for kids. And then
which I watched a lot of too at the time on USA. I mean, I watched a lot of American Gladiators.
Yes, I did too. It was a super fun show. And this was sort of the kids' version. And then there was also Legends of the Hidden Temple, which I guess was sort of like got mashed up with like Indiana Jones sort of, and with weird like Mesoamerican stuff. Part of it where like there was this talking Olmec, skull, all sorts of strange things, just like describing them neutrally. Anyway, I'll tell you, I'll reveal who that was afterwards. But yeah, so it had its own unique stamp. And so I was trying to think what was it and then what has changed. And one idea I had was there was this sort of idea of like kids versus parents. And that early Nickelodeon was like, this is just for kids. Your parents don't want to watch this. And and then like I got Nick Magazine. I feel like there must have been stuff like pulling pranks on your parents.
There was stuff. There was like annoying songs to sing on a car ride. Like I remember, I feel like that was almost in like the opening issue. Like that was like the big hook. Like
yes,
they advertised that.
So another game show that they had on was Wild and Crazy Kids. Do you remember that one?
Oh, that was like that and Legends of the Hidden Temple were the ones that I just dreamed about.
Yeah, I saw. Yeah, so
I contested on.
Okay, we had similar, aspirations as 8-year-olds of being on these shows.
The giant game of Simon Says on Wild and Crazy Kids.
Yeah, that one I think they must have like taken summer
so
camps
cool.
or something. So it was more like groups of kids versus individual kids. But I remember very specifically, my dad hated that show in particular, and would often make me either like turn the volume down or turn it off because the whole thing was just kids screaming. like what, when the kids were competing, there were like kids on the side like screaming constantly, and so it was just children yelling, and he was like,
in his ear.
"Shut it!" He was like, "Shut it off." And so, but there was this sort of idea. So it wasn't the like maybe Gen X or baby boomer like parents versus kids, like a real sort of battle. Maybe more the baby boomers where it's like they're fighting over Vietnam or something.
Right.
But it was like the parent, like this is just for kids. This isn't for parents. Whereas I feel like today there's been like a change in the culture where parents and kids are more on the same team than they were when we were children, where it was maybe you were still you could still be somewhat of a latchkey kid left unsupervised for more period of time, not as much as like a kid in the 70s, but more than today. And then, I mean, there was an article in the New York Times style section or something just a couple days ago about how decorating a college dorm room is now like this huge thing that parents participate in. And there's like Facebook groups where parents are exchanging ideas, and it's like a whole industry where there's fancy headboards and like wallpaper you can cheaply put up and all this stuff. And like, so we went to college together. I don't remember a single person whose parent participated in.
It was like the kids that went to boarding school that knew about the cinder block trick to like give you more space under the bed.
Right.
Like,
so the
leading edge.
So it's just there's been a total change in the relationship between parents and children, and whether they are oppositional, maybe like the baby boomers were the original like child rebels or something, and then for our generation it was sort of like we're opposed, but in a joking way, where like you're just pulling a prank on your parents, not running off to join the Manson family or something. Where today the parents and kids are like working together to decorate the dorm rooms of even like legal adults.
Yeah, they're like tagging each other's like Instagram accounts to
or this whole thing where parents participate in the TikTok videos that their like 12-year-olds are making and doing the silly dances and stuff. So it's just like, so this was sort of a mid-period.
I mean, it was like I think it was at my amazing colleague Alan Siegel. He did like a Guts oral history, and I think it was him that had this quote, and someone had a quote that like Nick wasn't like a family network; it was a very explicitly a kids network, and it was like and it's not, and the shows still had that aspect of like, I mean, when I watch Rugrats now, like the parent characters in Rugrats are an absolute riot. It like really, really genuinely funny, but it wasn't, I don't know. I feel like it wasn't quite that same thing as even like, to me, it's almost like with Shrek is sort of when I think about that whole thing starting of everything actually being, it's like an adult movie that a kid can be entertained by versus a kid's movie that like has some funny characters that'll appeal to adults. Like it's just like a nonstop cultural reference train. And, and so, there was a lot of, it wasn't like, I guess it actually was a little antagonistic. It was like, annoy your parents, like, get messy, like be slimy.
Yeah. Like you want your parents to buy this item, the GAC, that like, if you, left in your pocket, it went through the wash, like everything was ruined. It's like, so that was part of it. And then I guess, or maybe even that would be like a prank that a kid would pull. It's like dropping something in there to mess everything up. But yeah, I'm thinking like the show, even the shows that were on like in the early 80s, things where, I would have watched as like a 5-year-old, like He-Man or Transformers, there wasn't stuff in there that was for adults watching. Yeah. Whereas like Shrek, and a lot of people see that as sort of a negative turning point, especially in terms of animation. Like the whole thing is still, it's like winks to the parents and pop culture references the parents would recognize. And then like we also were the prime audience for the Disney Renaissance movies, which were like hit that sweet spot of entertaining children, but adults could still watch it and really get something out of it. But it wasn't like, here's a reference to a TV show catchphrase, for 5 years ago or something. It's just like, here's a really good story that like the whole family can enjoy. But that was sort of the Disney thing, very family friendly. The Nick thing was more rebellious. And and it was like it was like use it, like, sure, they used the character, like it was almost like really good character development, and that was the kind of like, I mean, it totally, you can watch it now and be like, oh my gosh, Dee Dee is a trip. But it wasn't like Dee Dee's just being like a mouthpiece for like whatever the latest, like, like meme catchphrases, which I appreciate, like looking back. And it's funny, like the logo, the kind of splat, that orange logo with the word Nickelodeon on it.
they picked, like, one of the reasons they picked that color is because they did a survey of parents, and that was one of the colors that parents didn't want. It was like that and slime green. And so this designer I spoke to, who, like many of the people I spoke with, came into his job in the late 80s to help rebrand the channel with no experience with kids. He wasn't like a kids designer, nothing like that. He just got this job, and he actually, this is a guy named Scott Nash. Now he's like that. He kind of made his whole life into being a children's book designer, and so it made a huge impression on him. But it's just kind of funny because a lot of the people that were doing this like came to it from a perspective of not being like a kids person. But I think that's why it worked. They treated kids like they were grown-ups, but indulged in all the things that kids wanted. You know, they indulged kids like they were grown-ups, I guess I should say.
Yeah, it wasn't like a kind of pandering.
It was
like, this is the kind of thing kids would like, and they were mostly right about it. I'm sure there were shows that were like total failures and we don't remember, but even though, like, you know, even like Hey Dude and Salute Your Shorts were only on for like 1 or 2 or 3 seasons.
I know, it's funny when you go back
iconic,
and
iconic shows. And so they like somehow captured, like, you know, magic in a bottle kind of thing of the right people understanding what kids want at the right time. And then says, I don't know. I never, once I aged out of it, I didn't like dip back in. And so I don't know if SpongeBob is like a different sort of humor that I think appeal to a different sort of kid, or.
That's a good question. The through lines that I saw in it were in the sense of like Doug and Rugrats walked so SpongeBob could run. Like they kind of helped create this whole Nickelodeon Animation Studios, which I think then like enabled them to really like have this kind of second wave, or I don't know if it was second wave or third wave at that point of these shows. And then like, interestingly enough, like kind of the same success was also what hampered something like Nickelodeon Studios in Orlando, because now they were starting to have, you know, these scripted shows with kind of these more what I consider to be more Disney-like shows, like more Hannah Montana style stuff. And the kids that were, you know, starring in these shows, like didn't necessarily want to go to Orlando, Florida. They wanted to be in LA or New York because they were, you know, showbiz kids. And,
right.
And that like was a new change and everything. But yeah, it's interesting to see kind of the through lines of, you know, how one thing led to another. I don't know I don't know how SpongeBob is in terms of like, if they were trying to like tap into a different kind of humor, or if they were trying to, because it's not like memes existed then, really. Like they weren't going for the screenshot, you know, like that kind of thing.
Right. It seems most like Ren and Stimpy, from what I understand. If we're saying those are the three, you know, 1991 debuts, it seems to flow from that and be a lot more antic.
Yes.
And maybe more Looney Tunesy in terms of like crazy things happening all the time. Whereas Doug and Rugrats were a more reality-based cartoon, I guess. And I think I messaged you this, that there's a ice cream chain that is having a Rugrats Reptar bar, like, you know, thing. So this is obviously appealing to people of our generation who have children now that are, you know, roughly.
They're like, hey, Reptar. The kids are like, okay. Like,
yeah, the kids, I don't know, unless it's still on, like on Nick Jr. or something. Or, although you do mention that they did sort of a Nick at Night for, you know, like 20-somethings, airing some of the old shows on late night. And I mean, Nick at Night was another huge thing. So I watched an incredible amount of television as a child, and it would just be like on all the time. I'd do my homework with the TV on, and my parents didn't care because, you know, I was getting it done. And so I also saw all these, you know, 50s, 60s.
Mr. Ed. I remember I was doing like, Mr. Ed.
Green Acres and the Dr. Reed Show, Bewitched. It was weird.
Was Lassie on Nick Jr. or on Nick at Night?
I think Lassie was on during the day.
Because I watched a lot of Lassie. It's funny, like doing research for this piece, like you know, because sometimes you have these memories and then you wonder if they're true. Like, you know, I'm like, I remember watching this show on a Sunday. Like I remember in my mind, I remember watching Ren and Stimpy on Sunday morning and having to go to church like halfway through. And then I was like, you know, that could be one of those memories that's not real. And then I looked it up and I was really happy to see it was on. I like looked up what time it was on. I was like, actually, that's a real memory, you know. But there's all these shows that that I must have been watching when I was like 3 years old, because I remember the shows, but unless Nick was re-airing them.
Well, there was stuff you mention it as sort of the like somewhat the hazy history for people our age, and so that's like Mr. Wizard and David the Gnome. I think they would just air them during the day, and so if I was sick, was like sick at home watching TV, I would just watch that, and it was Mr. Wizard. Sometimes You Can't Do That on Television. David the Gnome, Pinwheel, some others. It was like
even
ones
like Eureka's Castle,
ones from the early '80s that they would became sort of their syndicated rerun kind of thing, or maybe even late '70s. Yeah, so that is it's kind of weird, or even Canadian things. I think. Yeah, because You Can't Do That on Television was Canadian, and that's why Alanis Morissette was in it.
And I remember, it's funny, there was a show called 15, and it was kind of like a teen soap opera. I think that's the one that like Ryan Reynolds was in or something like that. But it was like heavy hitting stuff. It was about 15-year-olds with like substance abuse, and I would watch it, and I don't remember how old I was, but it was a little too old. I remember it was kind of boring, but it was also interesting because it was high schoolers. But I remember they had Canadian accents, and I didn't know what Canada, I probably didn't even know what Canada was, but I would be like, for some reason on Nickelodeon, everyone says a boot instead of about. And I like, that's one of those memories. I'm like, I swear that that's true. And it's because of that show 15, this girl, Brooke, would always come up. She was like the gossip, and she would say, what are you guys talking about? And I was like, why did she say it that way? But yeah, it's a lot of Canadian programming.
That's really funny. Yeah, and then Degrassi is also Canadian, right? That must have come over on maybe it was on Nickelodeon or another channel like that, and that was somewhat after I stopped watching. And yeah, that's funny. Okay, so you mention and provide a link to something about the Super Toy Run. Can you talk about that?
Yes. So the Super Toy Run was, in my memory, it was KB Toy Store. I don't know if they changed it around, but it was basically like Supermarket Sweep, which people might not even know what that is, but like a game show where you had, what was it? Was it a minute, or was it like 3 minutes?
I think
5 minutes.
Or at least on the
it wasn't a minute.
You had 5 minutes.
Yeah. You had your giant cart, and time went off, and you ran through a giant toy store, the likes of which barely exist anymore, big box toy store.
Right. Because both KB and Toys R Us have gone bankrupt in the past 10 years.
Yeah, exactly. All those those Toys R Us type stores like aren't really. So anyway, it was like run up and down the aisle, like, get all the dolls and the video games and the giant remote control cars like in your cart. And when your cart fills up, you get a new cart and see how much you can get. And then you got all that stuff. And I remember for years, one of my favorite things on the internet has been on AV Club. They have this like interview with several people that were contestants on the toy run. And it's just like a really delightful read, just like really good vibes. And one thing that they talk about is that, you kind of hear about that and you're like, oh, there's probably a million, disclaimers where they actually only went home with like 2 toys, and, anything that fell on the floor didn't count. And it was actually like totally at the opposite. They would rearrange the whole store so that the kids could get the most toys, possible. And obviously all this stuff, I'm sure, helps the bottom line in terms of like, there's a little bit of, cynicism there, but they would sit with the kids beforehand and strategize. And Mike O'Malley in particular, the host, was called out by multiple kids for just like rocking their world, being so cool, helping them out, like making sure they weren't nervous, because it's a crazy atmosphere. And yeah, and then these kids literally like basically a dump truck would arrive at their home and like drop off all the toys that they won, like a few weeks later. And then all of a sudden it's a really great read. It's like they, some of them, it was really hard at school because all of a sudden all these kids came out of the woodwork and wanted toys. And it's just like this really funny, but I remember watching the toy run and it just blowing my mind. It was like, I can't imagine anything that would be cooler.
Yeah, it was. I totally forgotten that this thing existed, and then I read that interview also, and we'll have the link to both your piece and any other piece we mentioned here below on the site. And what struck me was like, the adults really did care about the kids, and they could have. So this was this event that was promoting getting people to watch Nickelodeon, and also I assume KB Toys was donating the money or whatever, because
probably
they were
greasing the wheels of some
featured
relationship.
prominently. But like,
yeah,
they could have just done it where like, okay, you win $10,000 and you get to spend that at a KB toy store. But instead, they made it as an event, and like they took it seriously, even though it was so silly and absurd. But also the kind of thing that would totally like blow a little kid's mind and be the most exciting of it. It is his or her childhood life, and yeah, they really like. So yeah, you could have just, I don't know, if something like this happened today. Well, first of all, it'd probably be some sort of scam, like those things where, you know, follow and like this post, and we'll send you a Hermes bag or something, whatever the fuck, you know, the like Kardashian adjacent people do. But like, it wasn't a scam; it was real, and the kids actually did get to keep every toy that
and
they
it was
like
like these
knocked off.
regular kids. It wasn't like the son of an executive. Like it was like this. You know, they always had sweepstakes. I'm sure I was just like giving away all my family's information all the time. Like, who cares? Like, so was the phone book, whatever. But it had this, like, what was cool about Nickelodeon is it had this real, like, this is a place for kids, even if you're just a regular kid. Like, you don't have to be like an actress to, you know, sort of be part of the vibe of our network. This is like, you can go to your mailbox and send in your self-addressed stamped envelope, and like you could be on the toy run too. And I was, and like that's, you could have, you know.
Yeah, it's just like they did way more than they like had to in order to like make these kids and their families feel comfortable and have them have a good time. Whereas I'm sure there are other things that were happening contemporaneously and before and since then involving, you know, Hollywood or whatever, Orlando studios, and children, where the children were maybe not respected as much and were treated more like pawns or whatever. But at least in this instance, the kids were like taken seriously, like treated with respect. They really wanted the kids to have a good time. And
like one of the people I spoke with for the article is named Ann Kramer, and she and her husband Kurt Anderson were like part of some of the original founders of Spy magazine. And when she, and by the way, Kurt Anderson, if you haven't read it, Kurt Anderson's Jared Kushner article is amazing.
Oh, I have that bookmarked. Yeah, so Kurt Anderson.
Oh my god,
is still a writer and public intellectual, and
exactly. Anyway, Anne, his wonderful wife, who I spoke with, and I spoke with his daughter too, who's a few years younger than us, but like also has like a lot of Nickelodeon memories. She's in the Rocco's Modern Life, sub generation. But Anne came from Spy magazine and wrote to Geraldine Laybourne, who at the time was kind of the Nickelodeon executive who really was, guided all of the stuff I've been talking about with the rebrand, and said, it strikes me that, and she worked at Sesame Street before that. And she said, it strikes me that Sesame Street plus Spy magazine equals Nickelodeon. And she had also, this woman, Anne, had grown up on, reading Mad magazine as a kid in the Midwest. And it blew her mind that there was this kind of humor in the world. And so it's interesting to see those influences in Nickelodeon. But she was hired basically to run their consumer products group, which included the magazine. She was the editor-in-chief of Nickelodeon magazine, and included, GAC and all the things in stores. And I asked her, like, did you have any retail experience before that? She said, no. In fact, like, I was like, I was very Spy magazine, like, don't sell out, almost anti that kind of thing. And so once again, it's just so interesting that the people they had making these decisions really were coming at it from like, because at the same time as that was the sort of toy merchandising era of the 80s and 90s, like you talked about with the He-Man, and every show was like a toy. And with Nickelodeon, it was like the network was kind of the brand. It wasn't the show. And so the toy was GAC or some zany alarm clock that, had a train sound or to annoy your parents or whatever it was. And so, just those little things, I think just differentiated it from a lot of the existing programming, the sort of typical Saturday morning cartoon type stuff.
Yeah, and that the most famous product is like GAC, which it wasn't like there was a GAC show. It was like they invented this thing that was embodied the brand somehow. And it wasn't like, there weren't like Hey Dude action figures, because like, Transformers was actually it was a toy first that Hasbro acquired the rights to this Japanese toy line, and then they got people who worked at Marvel to come up with characters based on the existing molds and models and stuff. And so it was, the product came first, and then the TV show promoting it came after. So it was close. It was somewhere close to a commercial than like a pure artistic effort or something. But yeah, so there weren't Hey Dude or Salute Your Shorts action figures.
Unfortunately,
like
but yeah.
Floam and Gak and other weird things that were like
one other thing
green.
Yeah, like, and one other thing, since you mentioned, like, the Gak wasn't in shows, but and I don't actually even remember if specifically Gak was in like any, I mean, I'm sure it was, like, but like the little interstitials that they had like in between shows, those little, bumpers and stuff. But those little interstitials and bumpers are actually like hugely important to the network. We all kind of remember the songs, like the doo-wop, like Nickelodeon. And like it was this doo-wop band that they hired to do these things, and and all the different, I mean, even Pete and Pete, which our generation loves, The Adventures of Pete and Pete. It started out as like 40 different 1-minute little bumper videos, and the people I spoke with who were around at that point, they all just talked so much about the promo team and all those little things. And if you kind of like look it up, like there's ones, I mean, all these memories come flooding back. Like I would never just remember them off the top of my head, but as soon as I see them, I'm like, oh yeah, there's like dinosaurs singing Nickelodeon. And a lot of them were all done by different designers and different animators. And they were just constantly bringing it, like, just like they all had all these creative friends, and they were like, hey, why don't you do the next like 1-minute Nickelodeon little, promo, little station ID thing. And in that way, I think a lot of those people that started out on the promos team ended up being on like animating team for some of their later shows and that sort of thing. So it's really cool because like when you, and those things really stick in my memory. I mean, they did a good job with them.
Yeah. And yeah, mentioning, so I want to tell my personal Pete and Pete story, but we'll put a pin in that. And, like, yeah, those little bumpers or like interstitials, they were, and you linked to like a compilation of some of them, and yeah, they were, again, like more well done than they needed to be. And I guess there was a lot of creative people who were involved in it and like, put care into it, like, hand-drawn animation, which is, I guess, basically a dead art at this point. But also if you think that Pete and Pete originally was these 1-minute shorts, and then sometimes they would just show like these random short cartoons. Like there was one that was based around The Cat Came Back. Do you remember that one? They would just air it at like random times. So it was almost like a proto YouTube in some ways, where like you didn't exactly know what was going to come next, and it wouldn't necessarily be a show. Maybe if like whatever show they were airing was only 25 minutes to 30, they would stick in some random cartoon or something. But yeah, there was a lot of just like weirder stuff that probably
it's cool though. It was very creatively energizing to write this story, because I was just talking to a lot of people that were talking about this extremely creatively fruitful era of their lives where they were really empowered and kind of like given a lot of leeway. And that was I could sense that, like, they really meant it when they would say like, that was one of the best jobs I ever had. And it was cool. Like that part of it like really resonated with me. And it was also cool to, Nickelodeon meant a lot to me, and I watched it all the time. I mean, the amount of TV I watched, just like, it sounds like I just watched so much TV.
Yeah.
But it was nice to know that I didn't have some false memory of, a bunch of stuff made by a bunch of jerks that were, it was nice to know that like actually the people doing this stuff are really cool and really interesting and have sort of gone on to do more cool and interesting work since.
Yeah. And I just suddenly remembered this story from a couple of years ago, which was that there was some sort of company or something that was producing these videos on YouTube that were like algorithmically derived and nightmarish, and there were computer graphics of like Spider-Man and Bart Simpson and other things, and like an alligator, and nothing. It didn't make sense because there wasn't a script, and just like a computer program was writing it, but they somehow manipulated or took advantage of quirks in the YouTube algorithm, such that if someone just let their kid, watch on a tablet or something, YouTube nonstop, eventually these videos would start coming up, and they get millions of views, even though they were nonsensical and nightmarish.
Like Peppa Pig, like bleeding from the eyes or whatever.
Yeah, and so that's like the complete 180 nightmare version of like a bunch of creative people like trying to do something for children's enjoyment versus writing an algorithm so that a like cheap CGI Spider-Man will like briefly entertain or distract a child such that like the video will play and that person gets like 1/1 millionth of a cent or something. So
Yeah.
times have changed. Like I guess is what I'm thinking. I mean, how did I assume? Do your kids watch anything that's equivalent to this stuff today? Do you let them watch TV or
Do they watch the Bleeding Eye Peppa Pig? Yeah. Which the answer is probably yes. My kids, especially in the last year and a half or whatever, they watch a lot of shows. They don't have like to them, they want me to always go to Netflix. Like that's where, I mean, they'll watch other shows. They're like, can we watch this? It's on PBS Kids. I mean, it's all just the apps to them.
Mhm.
So they don't have, to them, they don't have this sort of like Nickelodeon Clubhouse type situation. They just are very show dependent. But they watch a lot of stuff and some of those shows they watch are really cool and I kind of enjoy them. And then some of them are just like total, just like trash, like no redeeming value. But I kind of feel like there's a place for that. Like, I don't really care. Try to like steer them toward the ones. I mean, I will say it's interesting. Some of those shows like Octonauts and stuff, they learn so much. Like they are parroting all these things about different animals. And so I cling to that. But also what I liked about Nickelodeon, it wasn't trying to be educational all the time. Like, and so, writing this piece made me feel a little bit better about my kids' own consumption, just letting them be kids. And
I mean, we turned out all right, more or less.
Yeah, exactly. I know. There's so many times I was like, but did I turn out all right? And it's hard. The jury's still out. But yeah, I watched a lot of TV. So however I am is definitely the result of something.
Yeah. Same for me, actually. We might have been friends if we were children and we're both so obsessed with watching TV.
Yeah.
So let me just briefly tell my Pete Pete thing, which I guess was the closest I came to the Nickelodeon Toy Run sort of exciting, entering the TV experience, which was, I grew up in northern New Jersey, and a lot of Pete and Pete was filmed in the suburbs of northern New Jersey, and so there were two interesting things. One was that a girl who was in my homeroom, the show took over her house for at least one of the seasons, and that was the Pete family house, and so she moved onto my street. I don't know, they must have been paid their mortgage off or something to like do this, film in an actual house that a family was living in. So she like for a year lived on my street while her house was being used by the Pete and Pete filmmakers. And then they filmed an episode or two episodes at the park at the end of my street. And me and the other neighborhood kids went down and watched them filming. And we got to meet all the actors. And it was the episode. It was I think a 2-part season finale where Aryeh leaves the show, and the villain was this guy who was an actor who lived in town, James Rebhorn, who passed away a decade ago. But he was the villain in Independence Day, or the evil defense secretary in Independence Day. He was in the Seinfeld finale. He often was a character actor. But he played this guy, the sidler, or the evil siding man or something. He was like aluminum siding salesman. And anyway, so they were just like the neighborhood kids. This is still the time when the neighborhood kids would just go to the park and hang out.
Is like seeing the guy from the guy from Home Alone, like the neighbor.
Yes. So we ended up like playing soccer with the child actors, and the kid who lived a block over, his older brother kicked the ball and it hit Big Pete in the nose, and the adults told us we had to stop. And I saw Aryeh, the actor who played Aryeh, smoking a cigarette.
Oh my God, that's incredible.
And we all somehow became convinced that the actress who played Ellen had a crush on my friend. And so this was like super exciting as a 11-year-old that happened. But
yeah, that's like and I'm also not, what I also love about this is like the kids whisper network. Like obviously the girl moved to your street, but like there was always like the kid at school that knew someone that had been touched by Nickelodeon in some way, you know what I mean? And like just these like legends that would be passed along because think about how many kids it was like, my cousin's friend like knows someone that Pete and Pete's being filmed in their house. And that was like social currency,
Yes, or this probably still happens with kids, but like, someone's uncle worked at Nintendo, or maybe they just pretended the uncle worked at Nintendo, and so they got to play the new Super Mario Brothers before anyone else, that
Yeah.
kind of thing. But yeah, so that actually strangely did happen. But that was my impression of fame. But you reminded me with the they did have a ton of contests. They're always having contests,
Yeah.
and this is, I guess, the Super Toy Run was the ultimate like lotto winning one. But they had I did win one of the smaller contests.
Oh, really?
I mean, much smaller, which was the Nick or Treat one, which I think you won like a candy or a T-shirt or something. But the whole thing was you're supposed to answer your phone, Nick or Treat. And
Wait, I would have remembered that, and like, no, I totally, yeah,
yeah, so it was their Halloween, contest, and then there were probably 5,000 kids who won, but so they called the house, and I answered, and I said hello, and then the person on the other line was an adult, and since I didn't say Nick or Treat, he was like, "Hi, I'm calling from Nickelodeon," and I thought it was like the cable company calling. So I was like, "Do you want to talk to my mom? Like we hadn't paid the bill or something?" But he was like, "No, did you enter a contest?" And I was like, so I had forgotten, more about this. So then eventually he like convinced me to say Nick or Treat. And then he's like, "You won!" And they sent me a T-shirt and some candy or something like that. But that was another. Yeah, again, like they didn't have to like do this. I don't know.
Like, and I love thinking about like who like the employee was, whose job it was like call kids and be like, okay, now if you say Nick or Treat, like
I will send you
something
like,
in it for you. Yeah,
5 pounds of candy. Yeah. So okay, well, what is? This was such an enjoyable piece to read for me. Have you gotten other reactions similar of people who are just like, oh my god, I've heard Roundhouse. I never heard anyone else talk about Roundhouse.
Yeah, Round. I had to get Round. Actually, I think that I'm almost positive there like something. There was like a line in there that got like edited out involving Roundhouse, and I always just like go with whatever editor suggested. And I was like one of the rare times I was like, no, we really actually need to just
you fought for Roundhouse.
Yeah, I was like, I got to keep Roundhouse. I mean,
Roundhouse was such a. I think it only had one season, maybe, but I remember it was a sketch show, and then it wasn't All That. It was before All That, and then All That was a huge hit, and Keenan and Kel were on that, and other people who became adult actors were on that. It was a huge success, but Roundhouse was just like a total blip. But I remember it was sort of like grunge influence or something.
It almost reminded me of like that MTV show The State at the time. Like it was kind of this like, it was like that was more like sketch but I remember my dad thought it was funny. Like there was the dad character on that easy chair it was like this giant motorized like Barcalounger that had like a built-in fridge. It might have even had like a built-in toilet. Like it was kind of this like gross concept. My dad thought that was the funniest thing in the world. And so like I thought I was watching like high comedy. But I never really hear about Roundhouse. But yeah, Snick came out like around this time. And I remember watching Are You Afraid of the Dark and those sorts of things. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I got some good, like, this is one of those pieces where I talked to so many people that I was trying to get so much into the piece, that writing it was creatively energizing and fun, but a little bit stressful just because it was, I was trying to get in like so many stories and voices. So then when it came out, it was nice to just have a lot of people that it resonated with. And actually I got some good responses from people who were parents in the 90s and remember their kids watching it. And like, those were some of my favorite responses because they were like, oh yeah, I remember my kids like freaking calling these numbers all the time and entering contests, but like, I didn't really mind it because the network was kind of cool. And there were I didn't mind some of the shows. And so, it was fun. And like I said, it was really fun to talk to a lot of the creative types who were behind a lot of these decisions because they were just really rad people. And, it's fun. It's like, I can't think of a more fun thing than to just be hanging out with kids in your creative life. And
like I said, reading it was Proustian and had me, thinking back on all these things I hadn't thought about in a long time, like, hey dude. And there's this whole package of other articles. And one of them is an interview with the grown-up child actor who played Budnick on Salute Your Shorts and other such sort of interesting things. 90s kids.
It was fun. Like with the Ringer, it's like, I feel like it was very Ringer week. Like it was, I was really proud. Like every time I would go to the site, there would be some really interesting, cool new story. And I feel like it was a well executed, package of like some really interesting articles by a lot of our writers.
Yeah,
I'm glad you enjoyed it too.
It was fun. It was enjoyable. It felt, something that felt positive is always nice, but especially when there's a lot of other negative news happening. So yeah, so thanks for the piece. Thanks for coming on. Anything else you want to say or promote or mention your Twitter handle or other such things?
Oh man, well, my Twitter's at Katie Bakes. Please come to theringer.com for all your sports and pop culture needs. Those are my big promotions. I don't have anything too much more exciting than that.
Well, yeah. So thanks again for coming on and going down the rabbit hole of this very specific micro generation that we share of pop culture life. It seems like a vanished world in some ways. Like it's not like I consume any children's television today, but it just seems like this was. Yeah.
What I'm curious about is like what happened to the game show. Like there was kind of a game show era, and I don't know why it's not a thing anymore. Like I don't know if there's some reason that it's not profitable or whatever it is, but I'm curious why there's not just more of that. Cause people love like experiences and, unscripted stuff. And so,
yeah, I mean,
back Double Dare, I don't know.
Yeah. I'm surprised. I feel like people at least must have tried to reboot Double Dare over the years.
There's probably been something.
And sort of like, Survivor is sort of like in the vein of Double Dare, at least in some ways. And I guess reality TV style competitions took over from more of the standard game show thing where you're not like following, someone individual person's journey. It's just like new contestants every week. Yeah. I mean, we didn't really talk about that much about Double Dare, but that was one of the signature shows. And another thing where I was like, so like I wanted to be on the show so badly, and I would like fantasize about the different strategies I would take to like dig through the slime to pull out the flag or like all the different things. I'll be like, no, like this person's messing up. Like you gotta like do this differently. So that was like, another childhood dream. There really was a lot. Okay. So anything else you want to say before we wrap it up?
No, keep up the good work. Hang in there. Thanks for the time. This has been a really fun conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time as well. And, thanks to anyone who is still watching this, who is or is not a geriatric millennial. But, you can rate, you can review, you can subscribe, follow, whatever. Okay, so thanks again, Katie, and thanks to all of our viewers and listeners, and we'll see you next time.